Thanks. Welcome to the Fall 2022 SWOG Group Meeting General Plenary Session. A year ago, when we met for a spring group meeting virtually, I put up this photo to remind you of just how beautiful the city of Chicago is and how much we missed it. Returning here now for group meeting after 3 years away, I hardly have to remind myself or you that it's even more beautiful in person, and I'm sure we're all quite glad to be back. These are the disclosures for our speakers today, parts 1 and 2. And here's our agenda. Our farewells and welcomes will include a special tribute. We'll cover SWOG news and accomplishments, and we'll announce a number of new Hope Awards. We then move on to this meeting's plenary theme, from map making to matchmaking, something of a selective journey through the past, present, and future of SWOG's role in the development of the NCTN's Precision Medicine Trials program. We'll start with farewells and welcomes. Our first farewell is to Dr. Gary Lyman. He has served as SWOG Executive Officer in the areas of cancer care delivery and symptom control and quality of life since 2015, and he's been an invaluable contributor to our NCORE research agenda. Dr. Lyman will step down from his EO role after this group meeting. I'm happy to report, however, that he will continue to serve as my senior advisor on immunotherapeutics and on the immunomatch and combo match trials. Dr. Lyman, I want to thank you personally for your past leadership, and thank you for staying on to let us continue to benefit from your wisdom and experience. So this section is not just intended to highlight SWOG research leaders. Our staff members are our lifeblood, and they merit recognition. Elaine Armstrong is one such example. She is one of SWOG's longest serving staff members. She started with us in a previous millennium and has led our quality assurance team for most of the last 2 decades. Earlier this year, she stepped back from the QA manager role and has since been sharing her expertise with us in the role of consultant. She does plan to retire in full come January. Elaine, again, I want to thank you for helping us confront issues ranging from institutional fraud to FDA audits to the turnover tsunami. We'd like to say one final and quite difficult goodbye. As you're no doubt aware, our longtime GU Committee Vice Chair and beloved colleague, Dr. Nicholas Vogelsang, died last month. SWOG's Deputy Group Chair, Dr. Primo Lara, is here today with the remembrance of Dr. Vogelsang.
Nick Vogelsang passed away on September 20th. He was 72. He lived a life well spent. Nick received his medical degree from the University of Illinois in Chicago, and then completed his internship and residency at Rush University Med Center, where I also did my internship and residency and where Nick was legendary. He then went on to a fellowship in oncology at the University of Minnesota. Nick was an extraordinary force of nature in the decades that followed. He served as director of the NCI-designated University of Chicago Comprehensive Cancer Center, and later as the founding director of the Nevada Cancer Institute. He was a fierce champion for clinical research and clinical trials that changed the standards of care. Among his countless leadership roles, he chaired the CALGB GU Committee and served as a visionary vice chair of our very own SWOG GU Committee. He was a staunch advocate for the mentorship of early-stage investigators. Most importantly, he was a master clinician with an impeccable bedside manner. He personally knew that people with cancer had to go through, he himself had to deal with the long adverse effects of chemotherapy and radiation therapy. He was known for giving his personal cell phone number to the patients he cared for. Needless to say, his patients adored him. On a personal level, Nick was an absolute gentleman, respectable, caring, knowledgeable, empathetic, qualities that many of us can only aspire to achieve. Like many others before me, I sought Nick's sage advice when I was contemplating a career opportunity as Cancer Center Director, and the wisdom he imparted to me was invaluable. Today, we mourn Nick Vogelsang's passing, yet I am comforted by the thought that he is in fact very much alive. His legacy and inspiration live on in all of us, whose lives he has touched, colleagues, mentees, patients, and caregivers. Thank you again, Professor Vogelsang. Rest in peace.
Thanks, Lucky, for that incredibly moving tribute to Dr. Vogelzang. Those who would like to support the Vogelzang Scholarship or Symposium in his memory, please reach out to Hope Foundation staff. We now have two important welcomes to extend. I just told you that Dr. Gary Lyman is stepping down as executive officer. With the help of our NCORE leader, Dr. Dawn Hirschman, we found an ideal candidate to take over for him in Dr. Virginia Sen. On learning of Dr. Lyman's plans to step down, Dr. Hirschman recommended a shift in the future division of the executive officer roles that cover the NCORE portfolio. Under her new vision, current executive officer Dr. Catherine Crew will oversee research in the areas of prevention and epidemiology, already in her purview, in symptom control and quality of life, and in cancer care delivery. Dr. Sun will become executive officer for our research in palliative and end-of-life care and in cancer survivorship. She brings a background in nursing research and education, and her work is focused on patient and caregiver quality of life issues. She has been a stellar grants person and investigator. An associate professor of nursing research and education at City of Hope, she expertly guided the S1820 trial, an intervention to relieve bowel dysfunction in patients who have had rectal cancer. She clearly helped lead the study to early achievement of its accrual goals. Dr. Sun, we welcome you as SWOG's newest executive officer. So this one's kind of big. I'll move now to a long-awaited welcome of our inaugural Vice Chair for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Professional Integrity, or DEII. Although he's led our Digital Engagement Committee since its founding, today I'm happy to announce Dr. Don S. Deason is moving on to a new leadership role with SWOG, that of the inaugural Vice Chair for DEII. We determined last year that to maximize the impact of our varied DEI initiatives and to guide our future efforts, we needed someone on our top-level leadership team providing strategic vision. That leader is Don Deason. Dr. Deason is director of the Pelvic Malignancies Program at Lifespan Cancer Institute, head of community outreach and engagement at the Cancer Center at Brown University, and director of medical oncology at Rhode Island Hospital. Among his many accomplishments, he is a true pioneer in using social media to educate, and not only in the field of oncology. If you have not yet ventured onto TikTok, Dr. Deason's page is the perfect opportunity. You'll be both entertained and profoundly moved, and you'll gain a better understanding of why Dr. Deason is an ideal fit for this vice chair role. I do want to end this welcome by reminding you that the final I in DEII is for integrity. Dr. Deason will serve as a neutral and confidential resource whom SWOG members with complaints about potential unethical professional behavior can turn to. Dr. Deason, please accept my welcome as our first vice chair for DEII. I also want to take this opportunity to extend special thanks to the members of the DEII search committee. That search was anything but routine, and it did require a continual refinement of what this role should be and what skills and experience it would require. The committee invested a great deal of time and effort, and I definitely think it shows in the outcome. I'm deeply appreciative. Now, on a side note, Don has now stuck me with replacing him as chair of our Digital Engagement Committee. That group is also stellar, and we definitely need to keep the momentum going. If you're interested in becoming chair or know someone who might be a good fit, please contact me ASAP. Before I move on from welcomes and farewells, I'm going to add another recognition to this category. I need to give a shout out to one more SWOG staff member who, thank heaven above, is not actually leaving, but who did just mark a major milestone with us. Courtney Willie just celebrated her 20-year anniversary with SWOG, the last 15 of which she served as our meetings manager. She is the mastermind who makes pulling off meetings of this size and complexity look easy, and who moved without a hitch from face-to-face meetings to virtual events and then to hybrid group meetings. I've already called her with blanky emergencies 27 times this meeting. The Las Vegas over-under is apparently 92. In any case, thank you, Courtney, for making our group meetings run so smoothly and for making it look easy. And now the news. SWOG research continues to be published in high-impact journals, and it often makes headlines. Since the spring meeting, we've published and presented a number of key findings, including an exceptionally strong showing at this year's ASCO. These findings include, but are not limited to, the following. Dr. Neeraj Agarwal's S1216 results showing that median overall survival for patients with metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer has increased markedly over the last decade as new therapies have been introduced. Findings from Dr. Amir Goldkorn's team that cell-free DNA can be used to predict which patients with muscle-invasive bladder cancer can safely skip neoadjuvant chemotherapy. S1512 findings by Dr. Kerry Kendra that neoadjuvant immunotherapy might reduce the extent of potentially disfiguring surgery for patients with desmoplastic melanoma. Results from Drs. Scott Ramsey and Dawn Hirschman from S1415CD that standing orders improved guideline adherence in the prescribing of colony-stimulating factors only when patients were on intermediate-risk therapeutic regimens and not when they were on high-risk or low-risk treatments. Dr. Joe Unger's findings that the Affordable Care Act's expansion of Medicaid was followed by a significant rise in the proportion of patients on SWOG trials who are insured by Medicaid. Dr. Karen Reckham's LungMap S1800A results showing a ramucirumab and pembrolizumab combination lowered the risk of death by 31% compared to standard of care in patients with non-small cell lung cancer. You will learn much more about where this trial is leading us in just a few minutes. I could go on and 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 on, but I will wrap this up. Finally, we have Dr. Sapna Patel's S1801 findings at ESMO that starting pembrolizumab before surgery rather than after boosted event-free survival for patients with stage 3 to 4 melanoma. You can visit the news section on the SWOG website to learn more about these and other exciting SWOG results. Also in the category of SWOG news, you may remember this slide from the spring plenary, and it's still valid. Since it looks like we might actually have a few stellar candidates, I will not be violating my own term limit rules and stay on as chair for another 6 years. I was expecting a little bit of booing following that comment, but whatever, fine, I don't care. Dr. Mike LeBlanc, SWOG group statistician, is chair of the Search/Nominating Committee, and as indicated on this slide, the membership of that committee was finalized over the summer. It will hold its first direct meeting tomorrow. Remember that nominations are due to this committee by December 1st. Self-nominations are legal and welcome. The new chair will be elected just 6 short months from now. The chair-elect will be the primary author of the next NCI treatment grant and will then help SWOG with special projects until April 2025 when they formally take office and toss me aside like day-old bread. Not that I'm bitter. With critical support from the Hope Foundation and Genentech, we continued our work to make SWOG's membership and leadership more diverse and to make our trial participant populations more representative of corresponding patient populations. The appointment of Dr. Deason as our new vice chair for DEII is the headline of the moment, but progress continues on multiple fronts. Over the summer, our DEI Career Development Fellow, Dr. Patricia Robinson, submitted a report at the 1-year mark of her fellowship, which listed some of these accomplishments. Here are a few of the highlights. Our 5 pilot DEI champions are working hard with their committees to diversify enrollment in an initial set of targeted trials. Dr. Robinson's report included specific activities each champion is engaged in. Our DEI monitoring committee has now met twice. That committee tracks accrual diversity at the level of individual committees, and it recommends interventions when we're falling short of targets. Several of our research committees have also identified DEI leads to focus on diversifying the makeup and leadership of the committee itself. Our NCORE pilot grant program, which supports site-level interventions to diversify accrual, issued its first 2 awards earlier this year. The program has now selected a 3rd award recipient, whom I'll announce a little bit later in my presentation. The SWOG Latin America Initiative, which I just learned yesterday is properly pronounced SLAY, nota bien, my teenage daughter would love that, under the guidance of Executive Officer for International Affairs, Dr. Mariana Chavez-McGregor, is forging new partnerships and strengthening old ones. The SLAY recently launched a newsletter to keep SWOG members informed about its general efforts and the SLAY training course. The latter, since the start of the pandemic, had been confined to the online realm, but it will once again be face-to-face this fall. In fact, the beauty of this year's course is that it's both in-person and virtual with simultaneous language translation. I'll be traveling to Montevideo, Uruguay next month to present at this event, and I am thrilled to be able to visit face-to-face with our Latin American colleagues once again. Of course, by traveling, I mean sitting on 5 different airplanes for almost 30 hours while I catch up on the 32,000 emails in my inbox. And I do want to comment that Uruguay is not easy to get to from Portland, Oregon. SWOG Clinical Trials Partnerships now has multiple studies in advanced development. Much of the CTP work since our spring meeting has been on implementing and testing infrastructure and systems for running trials without federal funding. And these systems have progressed enormously in recent months. Please remember, our goal for CTP is to develop scientifically interesting and rigorous studies for which we don't have sufficient government monies. To be fair, we've had many trials the NCI liked, but simply didn't have the bandwidth to support. 3 CTP studies have gotten final approval for protocol development by both CTP and our industry partners, with several others now in the review queue. SWOG sites will hear more about these studies soon as we move to feasibility assessment, and initial site outreach has already begun. So now let's move on to Hope Foundation announcements. I'll start by introducing our newest Charles Coltman Fellows. The first is Dr. Kim Blenman of the Yale School of Medicine, where she is assistant professor of both medical oncology and computer science. Her fellowship award is supporting her project, Spatial Dynamics of the Time is Tumor Immune Microenvironment, in patients from SWOG S0800 clinical trial. She reported quite a bit on that at yesterday's Translational Medicine Plenary. Our second Coltman Fellow is Dr. Jonathan Sham of the University of Washington, whose fellowship project is entitled Randomized Multicenter Placebo-Controlled Trial of Lanreotide for the Prevention of Postoperative Pancreatic Fistulae. Drs. Blenman and Sham, congratulations on your Coltman Fellowships. Our first Impact Award this year goes to Dr. Abdul Rafay Nakash of the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center to support the study Multiomics Characterization of the Immune Landscape and Metabolic Vulnerabilities in Alveolar Soft Part Sarcoma to optimize therapeutic strategies using novel immuno-oncology-based approaches. Our second Impact Award, chosen by the committee just last week, goes to Dr. Derek Steyerwalt and Megan Othis of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, and in Megan's case, also the SWOG Stats and Data Management Center. Their project is entitled Development of Innovative Approaches to Risk Stratify and Target Therapy for AML. Congratulations to all. After delaying the Young Investigator Training course through a good chunk of the pandemic, last month we finally convened an in-person YITC. It brought together 5 early career investigators who had been selected for the course in 2021 and who were models of patience and perseverance in waiting until late 2022 for their actual experience. This event is always one of the high points of my year, and it was even sweeter this September because it had been so long since we last met in person. You can kind of see in their smiles just how happy these 5 were that we could finally pull off a face-to-face meeting. The deadline for applying for next year's Young Investigator Training course will be posted soon on the SWOG Hope Foundation website. Last year, with generous funding from Genentech, SWOG and the Hope Foundation launched our NCORE Pilot Grant Program, which supports innovative projects aimed at increasing the representation of underserved groups within NCI clinical trials. We awarded our first 2 pilot grants earlier this year, and today I am happy to be able to announce a third. The recipient is Dr. Grace Hillier of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University, and her funded project is entitled Talk to Me, Tailored AYA Trial Messaging. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Hillier. Our final grant to announce is the first to be awarded under a new program. Earlier this year, our VA committee, working with the Hope Foundation, transformed our previous VA Integration Award program into our new VA Storefront Award program. The previous program gave funding to individual VA medical centers to support their opening of NCI clinical trials. The new program will support a storefront that will serve as an administrative and organizational hub, which allows multiple VA sites to participate in NCI studies. The application deadline for this program was August 1st. We did receive a number of applications, and the award committee made their decision just 1 week ago. The VA Storefront Award goes to the South Texas Veterans Healthcare System with Dr. Paramita Datta as principal investigator. The new storefront will include 2 additional VA medical centers as its first spokes, with plans to expand that number once the logistics are worked out. To Dr. Datta and all at South Texas VA, congratulations. I need to reprise my farewells and welcomes category to update you on changes to the Hope Foundation's board of directors. 3 board members have stepped down, while 4 new members have joined. Dr. Primo Lara reached the end of his service to the board earlier this year, and Drs. Jimmy Ray and Gary Lyman have just completed their terms. I want to thank all 3 for their generosity in serving the Hope Foundation. I also want to welcome to the board Dr. Monty Pal, who joined earlier this year, and 3 brand new members as of this week. Marty Heil, formerly Vice President for Advancement at Michigan State University, and SWOG members Drs. Lynn Henry and Christopher Liu. Please join me in applauding and thanking our outgoing directors and warmly welcoming our new board members. Early in 2023, in hopes of achieving broader representation, Hope will hold an open call for potential board members, including a self-nomination process. We will have more to say about this soon. I'm also very pleased to tell you the Hope Foundation Board of Directors met on Wednesday and reviewed and approved the Hope budget for 2023. The great news is that Hope has pledged a total of just under $3.3 million in direct support of SWOG research. I didn't actually write this, but let's applaud him for that, please. Hope support provides the critical margin for SWOG. Please visit their website to learn more about funding opportunities that may be a good fit for your research agenda and to find application deadlines. So that's it for our plenary updates. We will now move on to our core plenary presenters. 3 next-generation NCI precision medicine master protocol trials are slated to open this season, with MyeloMatch and ComboMatch both activating their screening protocols and their first wave of sub-studies. ImmunoMatch has just activated its pilot study. We'll learn more from investigators from all 3 of those trials. But first, we'll hear from a leader in the NCTN's first precision medicine trial, the granddaddy of NCI umbrella protocols. Yes, indeed, we are talking about LungMap. I was going to call it the master of disaster, but it didn't quite flow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Among his many titles at Yale, Dr. Roy Herbst is the Ensign Professor of Medicine and Professor of Pharmacology at the Yale School of Medicine and the Chief of Medical Oncology at the Yale Cancer Center. He's here today to present on LungMap's past, present, and future, all of which he knows intimately. Dr. Herbst was one of the 3 principal investigators on the original S1400 LungMap trial when it opened in 2014. Drs. Valley, Dimitri Kapalou, and David Gandera were the other 2. Roy has served as primary study chair of the current LungMap screening protocol as well, but is now stepping down from that role. Dr. Hussein Borge is an incoming LungMap study chair, with SWOG's Dr. Karen Reckamp as vice chair. Dr. Herbst will remain as a senior advisor on the trial. Dr. Herbst, the podium is yours.
Thank you.
I was happy to learn that there was an option after the initial radiation and chemo.
A clinical trial offers new hope. It offers something better than the status quo and the potential to get a new drug earlier in a very well-supervised setting.
LungMap is a precision medicine trials that is trying to help patients with squamous cell lung cancer. And it is a trial where multiple drugs are available to the patients under one umbrella.
This is a public-private partnership. You know, we have a large trial. We're funded by the National Cancer Institute, but also by a lot of funds from industry who have come together to work with us.
My doctor recommended I participate in the clinical trial, and I was happy to try it.
Precision medicine is when we have a drug that is found to target mutation in a patient's tumor. So it only will attack the patient's genetic mutation that drives the cancer, but not normal cells.
We need to find the drug that's best for your particular cancer. You know, what is it that's driving that cancer to grow? and then pick the best drug from the portfolio of drugs that are in LungMap.
Even if your tumor does not have a target for which we have a drug in LungMap, you may still be eligible for immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is a medicine that helps your own immune system fight cancer.
So in LungMap, you can get some of the most modern and innovative therapies. We're learning how they work, and we're going to continue to find even better drugs potentially in the future.
My clinic visits are very easy.
Patients can come in to one of over 600 clinics in the US and Canada.
Oh, getting to the hospital has been no problem at all.
Profiling in LungMap at Foundation Medicine, and the drug therapy is all provided to the patient at no cost. The only way we're going to really make a difference is to all work together, to take our best tools, find the best science, to bring those tools to the patient, and that's what LungMap is doing.
I feel great. I'm totally happy that I was chosen for this study.
This is personalized medicine at its very best. Thank you very much. Very proud to say that was a veteran from the VA hospital that we featured in that. And I know, Chuck, that's been something on your platform for a long time. Well, I'm honored to be here today, and thank you for the introduction to celebrate the birthday of LungMap. It turns 10. And I just want to state at the outset, I stand here as just one of many in this room and many around the country who have worked on this trial. It's really been a true team effort. And you can see our mission statement: an umbrella screening protocol, centralized screening, free of charge, getting throughout the United States. Initially, we had Canada. We've moved back from that, but to provide personalized immunotherapy and targeted therapy to patients. Here are my disclosures. So I'm going to talk about three things today: the birth of LungMap. I'll tell you a little bit about how it got started. Then I want to give a top 10 of some of the lessons learned from the partnerships, the achievements, and then a few thoughts for the future as I transition into my new role. So first, the birth of LungMap. So this all began around 2011, right in this room. It was the era of targeted therapy, the battle trial, which I was fortunate to work on with my late mentor Wan Ki Hang and the team at MD Anderson. The TCGA program was in full gear, and the NCTN had just recently been formed from the modernization of clinical trials. So in February of 2012, there are two important meetings. The first, the NCI held a meeting, you can see in the lower right, with the paper that came from that. That was led by Fred Hirsch and the NCI team, bringing together investigators to talk about ways we could do master protocols, economize the effort, use precision medicine and screening. And then Ellen Siegel on the top and Friends of Cancer Research also called a meeting. And I was asked to lead a section. And what did I do? I brought in my SWOG colleagues. So Mary Redmond was there and David Gindera. We brought Valley in. And we talked about how could we do this? And I still remember Chuck came to the meeting. Could we do this through SWOG? And everyone said, oh, you can't do this through the groups. But Dana was there and others. And we said, yes, we're going to do this as a SWOG trial. We'll be the IND sponsor. We'll work with all the other groups. You'll see that all the papers and trials are totally intergroup. We'll take drugs and biomarkers. We'll have innovative study designs so that we can get drugs to patients. How are you going to find that small mutation population if you don't have a large population? So here's the issue brief. This came out of Friends, 2012. You can see Ellen Siegel on the left there. That's Margaret Hamburg, the FDA commissioner. Extremely strong collaboration with the FDA. You can see in the upper right, there's Mary Redmond. Been wonderful working together all these years. You can see the panel. There's David and Valley on the lower right. We all worked together to make this a reality. There was motivation for this. There was money for this. The companies wanted to be involved. Let's make this public-private partnership work. So that was the birth of LungMap, and lung cancer was perfect for this, because more than almost any other disease, there are now 8 or 9 actionable mutations in lung cancer, and of course, we'd love to see more. So you can't find 5% PI3 kinase mutations unless you screen 1,000 patients. So LungMap really began to test in squamous cell lung cancer new targeted therapies, to do this through the NCTN, through a large database. So here is the way it first began. These are the first open sub-studies. Many of you remember this. It was a squamous-only trial, second or more line lung cancer. It was At that point, it was SWOG with our databases, but working with all the different groups. You can see we had a number of industry sponsors there on the right: AstraZeneca, Genentech, Pfizer, Amgen. Many of them are in the room. And we had, the beautiful thing is, because of the public-private partnership, the funds for the screening were fully provided. It didn't cost anything. We had the drugs, we had the trials, and you can see the central screening up top, and then there were 5 different arms. Or as you can see, if there was no marker, the patient would get immunotherapy, still experimental at that time. And then we were looking at PI3 kinase, CDK4, FGF receptor, and a MET, hepatocyte growth factor MET. That arm never began. Show you how difficult this is. By the time the trial started, that drug was actually had negative trials in other tumor types like GI. And this was recognized. This is 21st Century Cures, and we were asked to come to the government, to go to Washington, and this is now was part of the modernization of clinical trials: biomarkers, diagnostics, partnerships, and resources. So what I want to do, and to put this, there's so much over 10 years. I'm going to give you 10 lessons that we've learned to share with all of you. Many of you know this because you've lived through this with us. You've put patients on. I know there are patients here, but we're also going to hopefully help others as they do this in the future. So the first thing I want to say is it really takes a village. I mentioned that. It's teamwork. Only teamwork breeds success. And you can see on this slide that we're working closely with the FDA. Of course, there are regulators, but to be able to talk to the FDA about trial designs, to get informal advice, to do that with the companies, very rare, but very important. The NCI, what a wonderful partner. We started with Jeff Abrams, now Meg Mooney, Shakun Malik, the entire team there. We have a favored status there. Our trials don't go through the steering committee, the lung steering committee, but we do have very close interaction as we develop the studies, but it accelerates the development. It's a special partnership. And then, of course, there's the governance. Amazing. I want to thank everyone here who's from the SWOG operations group. I was with some of them yesterday. Really amazing the operations and how we pulled this all together. And then the FNAH, the Foundation for the National Institute of Health, which was sort of the broker between the outside industry and the NCI trials. And you can see, I won't go through all this, but we have governance and committees. It really does take a village. And I've just listed some of the names, so many. I apologize if some are not on the slide, but this is a team, and we've gotten together, we've become friendly, we're colleagues, we work on other projects. It really has brought so many investigators together throughout the world that are really just focused on one thing: helping patients with lung cancer. And here you can see some of the other names. This from Mary, the SDMC, the Data Monitoring Center. This is a current group. It's a lot of people working on this trial. It's a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of design, a lot of trials, a lot of papers, but all, again, with the goal to bring drugs to patients in real time in the most personalized way. And here are just some of the past and current members and a few pictures from the different places we've met. It really has taken a village to do this trial. Number 2, you have to evolve. The world is changing. Thank goodness medicine is changing. New drugs are developing. So in the upper left, you see the original schema. When was it? I think June 2014 we launched. And we did this very quickly. Dana will tell you, from the time that we started this, we did it in about 6 months, really amazing effort. And we're doing great. And then, of course, as I mentioned, one of the drugs fell out because there was a negative trial, so Amgen pulled out. But still, we were going strong. And then what happened in November 2015? A wonderful thing, nivolumab got approved for advanced lung cancer. It's great, immunotherapy, so quickly, 3 or 4 months earlier than expected from the PDUFA date. But what did that mean? That the trial now became somewhat out of date. So we had to quickly redo the trial, and we did. And we now looked for we had to think about immunorefractory disease. So we did that. And then, we decided to evolve into the current schema, which you see on the bottom, which is not just squamous lung cancer, but all-comer lung cancer, squamous, non-squamous, and now with a full intergroup governance, and that's the lung map that we have today. It's just called lung map. Before it was called SWOG 1400, now it's lung map. We actually, for those who really want to know the nomenclature, we have 3 different nomenclatures. If you see S1400, that's from the legacy trial. Those are squamous tumors in the refractory setting. Most of those trials are published, though people are still looking at the data, the tissue analysis. We're even doing work on patient outcomes and so forth. And then you can see there are two other trials. There's a 1900. 1900 are personalized medicine trials, targeted therapy trials. S1900 and S1800 are immunotherapy trials in the refractory setting. And that we're continuing to bring new trials into the fold. And here's our current schema. And again, I don't have time to go through it. There is a lung map meeting at 2:15 if anyone wants to hear about it. But if you just look up top, the key is the screening protocol. We're using Foundation Medicine. We've now added liquid biopsies. So we have a database of tissue and blood that is very valuable. The blue is the Legacy 1400. And you can see on the very far left, I just want to point out that long column. Those are all trials with FGF inhibitors, PI3 kinase inhibitors, PARP inhibitors, and BRCA and LOH patients. You know what? Those trials were negative. We didn't see them working, even though we had the abnormality. Those are important negative trials. That's told us we need to move on to new combinations. They're all published. Our lung chairs make sure of that. But now we have to move on to new things. And on the right, those are trials in the immunorefractory setting. And you heard about Karen Redkamp's 1800A. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I just want to point out one trial here. And this is a trial of Amgen 510, or a KRAS agent. So this trial is ongoing. And I think this shows the beauty of how the lung map can work. So this trial, 1900E, you might say, why do you need a trial of the KRAS agent, sotorasib? It's already approved. Absolutely. But for anyone that was at ESMO in Paris a month ago or saw the news, it's a miracle drug to be able to target KRAS G12C. 12% of lung cancer patients. It works, there's a response rate. But you know what, the survival curve versus docetaxel, pretty mediocre. Selection is needed. So what we have now in the lung map is we have a trial where we're looking at 3 concurrent mutations, STK11 plus KRAS G12C, P53 plus G12C, where there might be better activity. This is based on preliminary data, and this trial's ongoing right now. So by screening many patients and putting them into these different groups, we might learn about a group of patients and biomarkers that can be used in the future. 3, cohesive project management is crucial. You can see the wheel there, lung map in the middle. We're working with ECOG Akron, NRG, and Alliance. Haas is from the ECOG Akron. We have people from all the groups here. It really is a partnership. I thank Chuck for all his support and really reaching out to all the different groups. You can see the NCI, the FNAH, all working in partnership. You have to have a cohesive management. I want to thank the FNAH, the Foundation for the National Institute of Health. They work as a common broker. They bring the funds in and then funnel them to the different groups and to SWOG and to the data center. Jennifer and Takwa are here at this meeting. I'm sure Stacy is online right now. This group works with many of the different consortia you hear about, the biomarkers consortia, the immunology markers consortia, and this has been very helpful to us, and more than $100 million have come in through this mechanism that have supported our trials. Now this is one of my favorite slides. It's the funnel. I was talking to Dana about this earlier. We are finding the patients. Reach out to patients across the United States to find the patients with the mutations, with the immunologic markers who can get a benefit from this trial. But it doesn't come easy. We have to go out and we have to enhance the accrual. Even, the last few years have been tough with COVID, with staff changes. So we have to do social marketing. We have to have a website. We have to have an accrual enhancement committee. So this is the work of so many in this room. I'm looking around at some of our advocates. I see Frank in the front. Everyone working together to bring these patients in. And this is our accrual enhancement committee. And you can see one of the tweets. We meet often. I only attend it sometimes, but there's a dedicated group of advocates and physicians and nurses and coordinators who meet to think about how we can bring more patients into the trial in diverse areas. Number 4, drug selection. The hardest part of having a trial like this is keeping the shelves stocked, keeping trials going. It really is hard. We all have only so much bandwidth. There are a lot of good drugs, but there are a lot of not good drugs. And there are a lot of things that work and don't work. So we've really had to find and always keep this going. This is going to continue going, as you'll see. So we've screened more than 40 drugs, worked with 20 companies. Leora Horn led this committee for a while. She liked this so much, she went to work for AstraZeneca, so we lost her. But now it's very helpful to have her there, right? But now we're working, Haas Borgai has been doing an amazing job with this. Marty Edelman, who chairs a study coordinators committee. as I said, working very closely with the NCI. Look at some of the targets that we've screened. And you know what? There are many people here, and I can't even walk through, or Haas, or any of the people involved with the lung map, Mary, where someone doesn't say, are you interested in this in lung map? People come to us because we have the platform, the entire NCTN, to make this work. You can see there are different designs. There are biomarker-driven designs, non-matched designs. There are phase 2, phase 3. You name it, Mary and the team can design the trial. We let groups come in and work with us on the design of the trial they want. That's important because we have to be flexible. Well, we are all over the country, and I put my friend David Gandera here, who, as you heard, we started this with David and Valley and Mary and the entire team here. He can't be here today. I wish he was. But David felt that we had to pre-screen. Actually, the NCI didn't agree with that, but he felt very strongly, and anyone that knows David, he felt very strongly. So he was right, and he'd say, Roy, come with me, just listen to me and we'll do it. But it was the right thing to do because many of our patients go on because we screen them when they're in the frontline setting versus the second line setting, so we're ready to go. And I would say that any trial now, especially with trials moving so fast and with so many options, we offer pre-screening, which, by the way, is free. So think of the service that's being offered to people around the country to get this screening. And you can see all the different sites there. 4,600 patients have been screened. Amazing number. And this pre-screening, more than about half the patients now go on in the pre-screened way. So thank you, David, and thank you for all your leadership. Well, this is actually very special and so consistent with the theme of the day, clinical trial diversity. So we actually looked at the clinical trial diversity in lung map, and you can see Dr. Vadia with Mary Redmond. They did a study to look at lung map compared to other trials. I actually am very involved in clinical trial diversity with an initiative with the AACR and Bristol Myers. We actually have a course in a couple of weeks where we bring investigators together to teach them about this. And we had the opening last week, and Otis Borelli said, it's not that drugs don't work in minority patients, it's just that these patients never get it. They never have access to it. So what we're hoping to do with lung map, and we have to do better, is get access to patients with these drugs. So here you can see on the left, lung map, in the middle, SWOG trials in general, and on the right, the US population. And in lung map, we've done a little bit better in Black patients, in patients in areas with highest social needs, meaning rural areas, and also people that don't have insurance. And you can see that on this slide. On the left is lung map, and the right are non-small cell accruals in general. And you can see the rurality, the fact that we're getting through to more patients, to more different areas. Are we claiming victory? Not even close. So with Lucy, who's our DEI champion, and our chair, Janelle, and others, we have a very active DEI committee. We're meeting constantly. We met yesterday. We've got to do better. Black and African Americans, we need to do better. We need to do better with Native Americans, Hispanic patients. It's horrible. Hispanic patients are one of the hardest groups to get on trial. We need to do better. We have the access to other areas of the country. We will do better. Finally, translational medicine. You heard from Phil Mack yesterday. Actually, the chairman of our committee for lung map is David Cosino, a radiation oncologist, NRG for Mass General. We have all these specimens. This is what I'm looking forward to working on a little bit more now that I'll have a little bit more time. Mine the data, learn from the data. What are the resistance mechanisms? Look at some of the projects that we've already had. We have the largest, on the upper left, the largest database of squamous patients. And now we've seen some new mutations, PARP4, KEAP1, NFE2L2, and we've seen that they're mutually exclusive. We're working on this. On the left, bottom left, immuno-oncology biomarkers, PD-L1 and TMB. We can look at that association and how that might be used to better select patients for immunotherapy now that we're moving even to the front line or neoadjuvant. Upper right, how many databases are there where you have liquid and tumor, the concordance between those, using liquid biopsies to follow response? It's just an amazing opportunity for us. This is actually very interesting. This came through the FNIH. So many of you know about the CMAX. There are 4 of these, another partnership that comes from the NIH. So we're doing this multiplex immunochemistry. There's Ignacio Mastuba, a former colleague, a good friend, and he and the group at MD Anderson and the group at Stanford and the group at Sinai, where we're working with them. There's actually a paper going around looking at new markers in our 1400 I trial. Okay, getting to the end. Still have a little Houston in me. The eagle has landed. So 1800A, we had a positive trial. Now this was just recently, we learned about this, I guess, a little bit before the ASCO. We did it as a late breaker to ASCO. And this is a phase 2 randomized study of ramucirumab, pembrolizumab. And you see Karen working with Constantine. He's a alliance investigator, so you can see the partnership. This was published simultaneously with presentation at ASCO. This was based on some preliminary data. This is actually a paper that I was involved in, several in this room. It was in GU cancer and GI cancer. The two drugs, if you can look in the upper left, those red lines all the way on the right, show that in PD-L1 negative patients, there seems to be a synergy when you target VEGF with PD-L1. With Valley, before she left, and a good friend and colleague, and still talk to her quite often, we actually worked to get these two companies together. Seems easier than it was, trust me. Merck and Lilly to come together, work on this trial. We did this, we made this happen, and that became 1800A with Karen, of course, with us, and Constantine as the PIs. This trial basically took ramucirumab, pembrolizumab, and compared it to standard of care, which was docetaxel or docetaxel ramucirumab. It was a phase 2 trial, 130 patients. This is what we worked on with the company. This is what they wanted to do. Could we have done more? Could we have gone to phase 3? Sure, but we worked on the terms. We worked with people as they would work with us in LungMap. And this is the trial shown here on the right, and I'll just cut to the chase. Chuck already mentioned it, 31% improvement in survival, hazard 0.69. Is this approvable? Will this go in the compendia? Maybe, but it needs to be confirmed. So, but the fact that most of the patients got the standard of care, as you can see, really is a very positive thing. So this trial, we have a winner, and we had a wonderful ASCO, but we wanted to take it a step further. Let's get this approved. Let's get this to even more patients. So what's next? So this, you heard about Pragmatica. And the idea was, the first thing we did, and this is where Ellen Siegel and her team were very helpful, and the NCI, and the companies, we have filed for a breakthrough designation. So that's ongoing. But to do a trial to confirm this would be 1,200 patients. It will cost $20 million. It'd be very labor intensive. Is the world ready for this right now? Were the companies ready for that? Probably not. But the FDA approached us, and Chuck, thank you for all your support, and everyone here, and said, what about doing a pragmatic trial? So I had to look up what pragmatic meant. I'm not very pragmatic. But simple, real world. Now, there are many people here, I've been to a few committees today that are talking real world data, but it's usually retrospective, it's not randomized. We're gonna do a prospective real world trial. The only marker we care about is survival. There was no PFS difference in the 1800A, so we're not even gonna measure it. Concurrent medications, we don't care. We do care, but we're not gonna measure it. Whether someone had missing their right finger, we don't care. We don't need all that data. What we need is just what Rick Pazder tells us, just show us that it works in survival. So as a team, we've done that. It's a pragmatic trial. Karen Redkamp, Constantine, the PIs, Karen will talk about it more at the lung session later, but you can see that it's gonna be the ramucirumab, pembrolizumab versus dealer's choice control. Very minimal criteria for eligibility. Of course, they have to have failed immunotherapy, but really, we're not going to get picky about little things. We just want to get a trial out there. The whole document, I think, is 10, 12 pages, the whole protocol. That's, so you don't have to read through all this stuff. The consent form is going to be 6 pages, a really pragmatic trial. And as Chuck was alluding to, this is a new way of doing business. And we're very proud that they've asked us through the lung map to do this, and I'm excited to work with the group as this moves forward. So finally, number 10, the reason I wanted to start with a video is it really is about the patient. We must never forget that we're trying to help patients with this disease. We've done a great service. We have to do more. Patients benefit from getting new drugs earlier in real time, and very proud over 10 years we've done that. The entire team here, we've worked with advocates, we have advisory committees, we'll do more of that. So as I end, I just want to say thank you. We have done very well. Here's the numbers, and this is online, but over 4,600 patients. You can see the number of specimens, over 10,000 specimens. You can see it says 35 papers, actually about 100. These are only the ones that, and it's becoming exponential, the number of papers and abstracts we have. And really, it's just been a wonderful team effort. So as you heard, we are changing the leadership, a smooth transition of leadership, and it's I will remain as an emeritus chair, but you can see the new chairs, and maybe they can stand up. We have Haas and Karen. Would you stand up for a sec? Welcome. And I also want to, I think she's here or she's watching from North Western Jyoti Patel, who's been the vice chair with me, and she'll return as a study champion. But take a look at this. This is a leadership that's balanced among all the cooperative groups. It really is a very special team. So my thoughts for the future, since this is my time to say a few thoughts, I'll just tell you that, in my opinion, master protocols provide efficiencies and can be very successful. Hopefully you've seen that. But implementation can be complicated. It's not been easy. Oversight, conduct, and monitoring are more involved than a single study, or even the same number of independent studies. A major lesson learned is the need for upfront planning, communication, and specification of roles. We need constant innovation. We need to keep an eye on the timelines. We need to keep a team working together. A major key to success is flexibility with a principled set of constraints. I would urge, as you go forward, let the science drive the trials. Learn from translational research. There's so many trials out there that are not going to work. We got to use science to do those trials and promote access and diversity to help the most patients with this disease. So I just want to thank Chuck. It's just been, I remember meeting Chuck and Nathan. We were at the VA about 10, 11 years ago, and we talked about this and really spiriting this forward. Ellen Siegel, I talked to her for the first time in 2012. Now I talk to her almost every day. She's one of my best friends, but she's really helped this really work forward. I've been fortunate to serve as vice chair under 3 leaders, David Gandera, Karen Kelly, and now Janelle. It's just been a pleasure. And this is just really the team. And you can see there's Valley and David up top. The bottom is the last time we all got together before today as a group at the Friends of Cancer Research. It was right after the Super Bowl in 2020. And then just as a final thank you, I want to thank all my friends and family who have supported me. I can't tell you how many conference calls I've done when my family's been having dinner, or we've been traveling, or how many earbuds I've lost. And also my group from Yale. I'm very proud that we've gotten Yale very involved in this. There are many people from Yale. Eric Weiner, my friend director, is here, ASCA president. Yale's totally committed to continuing to work with the cooperative groups on these projects. Thank you very much.
As a little bit of a off-script fun and little-known fact, Gandera was cooking this all up, and the early discussion that you heard about from Roy was all occurring right before the last grant went in. And the GCO and the stats office had the biggest fight you could ever imagine about whether or not to include this crazy idea in the application. It was not Mary Redmond who opposed putting it in, just for the record, but GCO won. It was actually incredibly well received, and the rest is history. So thanks again, Dr. Herbst. All right, so Dr. Harry Erba is director of the Leukemia Program and director of Phase 1 Development in Hematologic Malignancies in the Department of Medicine at Duke University. He also, as you all know, chairs our Leukemia Committee, and he previously served as a SWOG executive officer. On the MyeloMatch trial, Dr. Erba co-chairs the Senior Scientific Council with Dr. Mark Litzo. Today, he will tell us more about MyeloMatch. Harry?
Thanks, Chuck. Given that my 360 review is coming up after, I was glad to not see my photo up there a little bit earlier saying goodbye. So I hope that bodes well for me. And Roy, as you remember, you were my intern. You've done well. I hope to follow in your footsteps. Okay, so MyeloMatch hasn't started yet. We don't have 10 years to show you. So what I'm going to show you today is why, who, and what. And so the term MyeloMatch actually came from our good friend Jim Doroshow as we were trying to come up with a name for this precision medicine initiative in acute myeloid leukemia and myelodysplastic syndromes. I actually came up with a bunch of really colorful acronyms, but I think Chuck told me not to use them. So I'm really glad to have the MyeloMatch insignia and be part of the MATCH program, a precision medicine initiative in the National Clinical Trials Network. So for you to understand why we need MyeloMatch, you need to understand a little bit about what we do in the care of patients with myeloid malignancies. We've known for decades that cytogenetic changes at the time of diagnosis, and more recently, specific mutational changes, impact on the prognosis of these patients. Sorry, here we go. But those patient clusters that I showed you and are listed at the top in different colors really don't show you the heterogeneity that's so incredible in the disease itself, with a median of 4 mutations, driver mutations in patients with acute myeloid leukemia, and the number goes up with advancing age. And we know that this is very important in the classification of our patients. It's been used now in the international consensus classification for MDS-AML and AML. You might all remember back in 2000, the World Health Organization changed the diagnosis of AML from over 30% blast to over 20% blast. Well, a new committee just published in Blood that, well, maybe it should be down to 10%. And really what this slide shows us is that there is an increasing understanding that is really the biology of the disease, not just the number of blasts in the blood or the marrow. And so what you see here is a hierarchical classification of acute myeloid leukemia, starting with specific recurrent genetic changes, many of which are currently targetable. Then mutated P53, MDS-AML or AML, then secondary mutations that are found in patients with myelodysplastic syndrome, such as spliceosome mutations, chromatin modifiers, cohesin complex karyotypes, and then probably what's going to be a small group, MDS-AML and AML not otherwise specified. And of course, that gene expression that mutational profile really doesn't help us understand the incredible heterogeneity in the patient because of the evolution of AML with various clones coming and going over time. One of the challenges we've had then in understanding how to use this information, this risk stratification based on mutation and cytogenetics, is we also have learned that the response to initial therapy is really important. So whether you use multicolor flow cytometry as done here, showing persistence of disease was associated with a higher risk of relapse, or if you use an RT quantitative PCR assay for a specific mutation, in this case, the very common nucleophosmin mutation, again correlating with relapse, or you use a next-gen sequencing panel that has a sensitivity of about 1 to 2% variant alleles, you can see how this correlates and with outcome and is prognostically important. And even recently, Jerry Radich, our translational chair, has shared with us this data regarding error-corrected double-stranded DNA sequencing, showing that it may actually even be more informative and more predictive of or prognostic than flow cytometry. So with that as a background, how do we approach the patient with AML? And I'm going to come back to what the challenges are with that information I just showed you. Well, the first thing we do is when we see a patient with AML is we think, is this a patient who's eligible for curative therapy? Are they fit for what we've had since Yates published this in 1973, a combination of an anthracycline, daunorubicin, and cytarabine? Or are they unfit for that? And there have been tons of models that have been developed that help us try to understand how to distinguish patients fit and unfit. And the bottom line is all of those models fall short. But if we find them to be fit for intensive chemotherapy, our current strategy is to induce a remission, then give them a post-remission therapy, a consolidation, and then go on to allogeneic stem cell transplant or maintenance therapy. And we use some risk stratification based on those initial mutations and cytogenetics to help inform who should undergo transplant. We use MRD data as well. For patients who are unfit, fortunately, we now have a number of options for these patients. This has actually been my passion since I got into this business back in 1996, of finding therapies for the bulk of our patients with AML and MDS, our older population. And now we have some effective regimens, but they have to be continued as a maintenance unless we find that their performance status gets better with treatment, and then we could think about curative options like transplant. And so what we really want to understand is this treatment algorithm. We are not going to focus on what's grayed out here, patients with refractory or relapsed disease. We're going to leave that issue to investigator-initiated trials outside the NCTN to industry. So what's the problem with all this? Well, the problem is that unlike what you saw for non-small cell lung cancer, what was it, 200,000 cases? There's only 21,000 new cases of AML diagnosed in the United States each year. And the biologic heterogeneity of this disease clearly creates smaller and smaller subsets of patients. And there are often, as I mentioned, multiple potential driver mutations in a single patient. But the way these patients present requires rapid identification of those targets. They present with leukostasis and pulmonary failure, stroke-like syndromes. They present with DIC, tumor lysis syndrome, and a number of complications that requires urgent management and getting them onto treatment to overcome that marrow failure state. As I mentioned, there's no clear definition of eligibility for intensive therapy. It's been elusive. And in most cases, it's an improvement in overall survival that has often been the primary endpoint for full approval of new agents. But the problem there is we often have to wait many years for the required number of events. That's a statistician's way of saying our patient has died. And the confounding effect of allotransplant on the mortality. And so where is the benefit coming? Is it from that new therapy you gave them or just getting patients to a transplant? We've tried to use other early markers like event-free survival as a suitable trial endpoint. It might give us a better earlier marker. However, we can't even agree on how to define failure to achieve remission because it's a time-dependent variable and it depends on blood count recovery. And although it's clear to every clinician who takes care of these patients, the clinical benefit of a CR has not been used as a surrogate for approval. And then all of those MRD assays I've showed you filled our journals with great papers showing the prognostic importance of having residual disease, which I always think of as a no-brainer. Really? The cancer is not completely gone and you're surprised it's coming back? So what we really need is prospective data providing a predictive value of a specific MRD assay, preferably done on an IDE in a CLIA certified lab. And that's why, those are the reasons why we developed MyeloMatch. And what I'm showing you here is the basic structure of MyeloMatch. At the time of initial diagnosis, patients will be registered to what we call our master screening and reassessment protocol, or the manufacturer's suggested retail price, as it would be, the MSRP. And in that, I'll show you the data that we collect on those patients, and then we assign them to a tier 1 protocol, an initial therapy, an induction-like therapy, kind of mimicking what we do. But after that step, we then reassess the patient and assign them to a follow-up treatment, a consolidation or a post-remission treatment, trying to get rid of measurable residual disease. We include in then a tier, after another assessment, a tier 3 with transplant, and finally maintenance with targeted therapies. So how do we accomplish this? Well, this has been a work in progress for many years. Here's the MyeloMatch structure. We have 3 major committees: the Senior Science Council. I'm the co-chair with my colleague Mark Litzow in ECOG, and although he is no longer the ECOG chair, he will remain here as my colleague here on this council. We have an Agents and Genes Committee and a Laboratory Committee. And each of those committees has membership from all of the NCTN groups with an interest in leukemia. But very importantly, right at the start, right at the beginning, the NCI and many aspects of the NCI. And then we have clinical basket working groups that oversee the development of the specific protocols. Oops, let me go back. And those are led by different groups. It doesn't mean older AML is the province of the Alliance and SWOG. It means those are chaired, that committee is chaired by SWOG and Alliance and so on. You see our baskets there. So what does the Senior Science Council do? We oversee the work of all the committees. We ensure that the trials and development are consistent with the goals of MyeloMatch initiative, rapid identification of targets, leveraging CLIA certified MRD assays to decide on predictive, whether a treatment is predictive of outcome. We determine when the protocol that's been in development should be submitted to PIO for formal NIH evaluation by the Leukemia Steering Committee. And here's the membership. The Laboratory Assays Working Group is chaired by Chris Horrigan and Jerry Radich. They evaluate and recommend assays, including new versions of assays to employ in the Precision Medicine Initiative. They recommend which of these assays are critical to the PMI, and they recommend specimen handling requirements for the assays. And finally, they are in constant discussion with the clinical basket working groups as they consider what agents are important to bring into the portfolio, as well as the Agents and Genes Working Group. Now, the Agents and Genes Working Group, and you can see the chairs there, prioritize and recommend new INDs for the initiative and designate agents of interest. They define the levels of evidence that will be required for consideration. They host meetings with potential pharma partners. We have investigational drug branch ad hoc members who have specialty and expertise in the target pathways. We have evaluated 20 different agents. The Agents and Genes Working Group has approved 7 agents for MyeloMatch, 5 of which we now have CRADAs in place and 1 that we're working on. And additional agents are constantly under consideration. And then the clinical basket working groups, they're responsible for the collaborative clinical trial development, leveraging the expertise across the network. So these working groups have membership from all of the NCTN leukemia committees. But they, early on in the process, they assigned the protocols at that level to an NCTN leukemia committee and their statistical center for development and activation. And they're charged with the development of a trial portfolio then, as I showed you, that's broadly analogous to the sequencing of treatment from diagnosis through the end of treatment and follow-up. We are going to try to follow patients from the time of diagnosis through the end of their therapy. And we encourage them to involve patient advocates early in trial development. Now here you can see the chairs. As I said, they are really just responsible for coordinating the meetings, which I'll show you. Our own Laura Michaels from SWOG and Jeff Wee from the Alliance are chairing the older group. Toyosi Odeniki from the Alliance, the MDS working group. The younger adult working group is Ihab Atala from ECOG Akron. And then our own Pat Stiff, as well as Miguel Angel Perales, do the transplant and cellular therapy group. Gail Sperling, the patient advocate for our leukemia committee, accepted my invitation to be the patient advocate for all of MyeloMatch. We all quickly realized that that was too much, especially if we're going to get patient advocates into all those working groups. And so others have stepped up and have met with us. We've been busy. Here you can see that every week we meet. One of the committees meets, but it's taken a while to change culture. We started January 28th, 2019. It's almost 3 years, and we are just about to launch our first clinical trials. But what you need to understand is we are completely changing the way we do clinical investigation in the NCTN, in AML and MDS, making it a collaborative process right from the start. And of course, we can't do this without our NCI colleagues. The regulatory structure is shown here. The INDs will be held by the NCI and managed through the Regulatory Affairs Branch. The CRADAs will be managed by the Regulatory Affairs Branch Agreement section, and the MDNet, which I'm going to show you, is capable of incorporating new technologies for precision medicine as needed. So in other words, the technology, not just the agents. The Precision Medicine Analysis and Coordination Center is developing an IT infrastructure that will analyze MDNet data, as I'm going to show you, and make iterative treatment assignments, kind of a matchbox, as I think my colleagues in other match programs call it, where we prioritize on the basis of individual trial eligibility and availability of the trials, and develop a web resource for rapid data exchange and electronic communication across the networks. So what does the MDNet and this IT infrastructure, what will it enable? Well, first of all, it's going to enable tracking patients via the master screening and reassessment protocol, regardless of which treatment protocol they participate in. And the response outcomes from the treatment protocols will determine their next treatment assignment. They are going to ensure a 72-hour specimen analysis and protocol assignment. This is key. This is critical. It usually takes up to 2 weeks to get a next-gen panel back on our leukemia patients, and often we can't wait that long. It's going to provide the ability to track individual patients and their MSRP data through the entire program. Because think about it, a patient might come in and go on a SWOG study and then go on an ECOG-ACRIN MRD eraser trial and then the Alliance-led transplant trial. How are we going to keep track of those patients? Well, they are going to get a universal patient identifier that will be linked to each of the cooperative group trial numbers. And so you could query a patient with what protocols they've been in through the entire process and query a protocol to see which other protocols the patients have been involved in. They'll be able to evaluate clonal evolution over time as patients proceed through the tiers, as I tried to show you in that complicated graph about the heterogeneity of the disease. So this is what happens. At the top, a previously untreated patient, we are starting fresh. No one is grandfathered into this. This is a completely new initiative. They will, oops, did I go on? I did, okay. They're gonna be evaluated at the NCTN trial site and registered for initial screening. Their samples go to the MDNet, where a bunch of assays are done. They are then will be assigned to a specific protocol, and when they finish that protocol, they go back to the MSRP, back to the MDNet for another analysis to see what protocol they go on next. So what's happening with the samples? Well, samples from the NCTN trial site, of course, go to the local site for just pathology, and we're going to depend on the local pathologist to tell us, is it AML, is it MDS? But then the MyeloMatch MDNet is going to have samples go to various laboratories that are listed there, and I'll show you the assays that will be done, and a sample to our biorepository at National Children's Hospital in Columbus, and all the residuals from those samples go there too. But if an NCTN group has specific science that they're interested in that trial, they will be able to get samples as well from the biorepository. And what are we going to do? We're going to be doing next-gen sequencing, both targeted panel sequencing, whole exome sequencing, RNA sequencing. I'll show you that in a second. We are going to be evaluating error-corrected, also known as double-stranded or duplex sequencing, PCR-based assays, such as for the nucleophosmin, tetranucleotide insertion. Flow cytometry is going to be done by our friend Brent Wood, who's down in UCLA. Cytogenetics in fish. Min Feng, God bless her, has said that she's going to give us a 48 to 72 hour turnaround on cytogenetics. She's probably getting her lab ready right now. And then histology, immunohistochemistry, immunofluorescence, all will be done in CLIA certified environments. This is a list of the assays that will be done at baseline. It's a coverage of all the myeloid mutations in the NCCN guidelines, 40 signal nucleotide variants and insertions, deletions, 29 fusion drivers, and 5 gene expression targets. So it covers all of the gene mutations and fusions that I showed you early on that the International Consensus Consortium, the WHO, the European Leukemia Net, and all of those bodies have decided on how to diagnose AML with recurrent genetic changes. So what do we have so far? We haven't activated anything yet, but I want to show you, we've really been working on Friday mornings when we meet. This is the tier 1 of the younger AML, and it starts with a molecular screening. I'm proud to say that Paul Shammy, my longtime colleague in Utah, and Tara Lynn, who's at the University of Kansas, are leading one of the first studies to be approved by the steering committee and in line for activation sometime December or early next year in poor risk AML. Our Canadian colleagues, the Cancer Trials Group in Canada has an intermediate risk protocol, and then protocols in specific genetically defined subsets of patients that we currently are identifying for specific therapies now. Core binding factor gene mutations, nucleophosmin mutated, and FLT3. And I'm just listing here the protocols. I'm not going to go through them now. If you're interested in more discussion, I'll be discussing this in the Leukemia Open session. I'll just mention, how are these protocols now numbered? You'll see the first one is MyeloMatch. 1 stands for the tier, so an induction tier. YA stands for younger adult. And then S stands for, SWOG, okay? And then, that's ours, okay, I recognize it. And 01 is the number of the protocol. I'm just messing with you. Okay, here's the tier 1 for older adult AML. Again, what I want to show you here is not specifically, making you into AML mavens here and biologists, but to show you the intergroup collaborative way that these studies are being developed. And remember, that working group has physicians, scientists from all of the different groups there, and they are deciding how these things are going to be divided up so all of our statistical centers stay solvent and stay in the game. And here are their trials again. We have trials in development in myelodysplastic syndromes and in transplant. So what are the challenges? Okay, I'm going to start with challenges. Well, the overall trial design. What if the patient has multiple mutations that makes them eligible for different studies? Of course, we have to deal with that. Should age be the defining criteria for older and younger? I'd like to think that I might still be eligible for a younger AML study if it was appropriate. I think I could. How to keep patients on study when there's not a study? How to keep them in the protocol when there's not a study for which they are eligible in a current tier? So they go through tier 1, they're in remission, but there's no subsequent study. Well, we're going to have we have designed a tier advancement protocol so the patients get standard of care therapy and stay on the protocol, and we're able to collect samples. I thought that was pretty smart, actually. I didn't come up with that. How to minimize burden on the institutions while still encouraging enrollment of all eligible patients. And this is a big one, okay? Because we're going to require all trials in a basket to be opened at a site. This is going to be a huge regulatory issue for sites, a big burden. But we still think having multiple trials is better than having one master trial, because if one arm goes down in one of those tiers, the whole thing would have to close. And we're looking into the possibility, as probably many of you are, that there might be a centralized way of developing a template for the beacon builds that each of the sites can tweak. And we have to make sure that over time that there's fair distribution of the trials between the cooperative groups. But what are the benefits? And that's where we are. Well, we're going to be able to assess over the time of a patient's treatment the clonal evolution of AML. We're going to be able to provide prospective evaluation of measurable residual disease assays, both flow-based, NGS-based, in CLIA-certified labs, and then assign patients to therapies to see if that therapy is predictive of a response based on having MRD still present. It's also, because all the INDs will be held by the NCI, it allows for combinations of investigational agents that might be challenging in the private sector. And it gives us a more rapid readout from the signal finding randomized phase 2 studies, because that's what we're developing. We're looking at remissions that are MRD negative compared with large phase 3 studies that will take a decade to read out. And very importantly, this is an ongoing collaboration between the NCT and cooperative groups and the NCI CTEP, and early discussion with potential industry partners during trial development. Everyone's at the table before we write a protocol and try to get industry funding or get it through a leukemia steering committee. We're all involved. And it creates a clinical trials portfolio and operational model that we really believe will be attractive to industry partners and to NCTN sites to accelerate the launch and completion of precision medicine clinical trials for the advancement of effective therapies for myeloid malignancies. And importantly, it's going to help develop the careers of our young investigators by promoting leadership throughout the clinical trial portfolio and laboratory program. And this will help ensure the future of the NCI cooperative group system, which I think is really important. This is my last slide. I was an executive officer up to 2012, then I took over from Fred Applebaum at that point as the chair of the committee. But in 2010, you all remember the Institute of Medicine looked at the NCI cooperative group program. And this I've taken from their last paragraph in their conclusion. Improved treatments for cancer will be delayed and patient lives will be lost unnecessarily unless the efficiency and effectiveness of the clinical trial system improves. And the implementation of that report, the collective recommendations, will reinvigorate the clinical trials cooperative group program. And it will have to be all of the recommendations. Modifying any single element of the program or clinical trials process will not suffice. Changes across the board are urgently needed. And finally, all stakeholders, including physicians, patients, healthcare insurers, as well as the NCI, the FDA that have been involved in our development of these protocols, academia, foundations, industry must reevaluate each of their roles and responsibilities in cancer clinical trials and work together to develop an improved, efficient, multidisciplinary trial system. I'd like to thank Rich Little, my friend at CTEP. When I started as an executive officer, he started as our liaison, and this MyeloMatch has been a dream of ours for over 10 years. And without his intervention at the highest levels of the NCI, we wouldn't have gotten this far. And of course, I've mentioned a lot of names, but none of this could happen without Dana Sparks, Sarah Cantu, Sharon Palmer, that all support of the Leukemia Committee, as well as the SWOG Operations Office, Megan Othis and Anna Mosley and the SWOG Statistical Center. And Frank DeSanto has been on some of our calls. He's going to get the word out about MyeloMatch so that 10 years from now, probably some other guy will be able to tell you what Roy just told you about LungMap. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry. These are getting a little tougher to follow. Dr. James Ford, a longtime friend, is professor of medicine, pediatrics, and genetics, and director of the Cancer Genetics Clinic and the Cancer Genomics Program at Stanford University Medical Center. He's founding editor-in-chief of the journal JCO Precision Oncology and is study chair for the Molecular Analysis for Combination Therapy Choice, or Combo Match clinical trial. Today, he'll give us an overview of that study. Welcome to SWOG at our general plenary session.
Thank you, Chuck, and all of you for inviting me today. So on behalf of my co-PIs, Funda Merrick-Bernstrom at MD Anderson and Lindsay Harris and Jeff Moscow at the NCI, I want to give you an update on the Combo Match trial, which is really poised to take off here in the next couple of months. So, of course, this fits into the program we're talking about today because Combo Match, together with MyeloMatch and iMatch, are the follow-up trials from the original NCI Match program. And like you've heard, Combo Match will as well take advantage of NCI core resources to implement. I will tell you about the designated lab network, which is unique from what you've heard so far for the initial genomic screening for eligibility, but the very same precision medicine analysis, or PMAC, will serve as the coordination center for assigning patients to arms and managing them, and the MDNet, or diagnostic network, will handle research samples, next-gen sequencing, and other assays involved in this protocol. So, of course, this is a follow-up, a logical follow-up to the original NCI Match, which, of course, was a large study over a number of years, ultimately with 39 single-arm phase 2 protocols, the initial ones launched in 2015. It involved centralized NCI-based tumor genotyping to match individual patients agnostic of tumor types, and including all metastatic solid tumor types, to a particular single drug targeted therapy based on that. So ultimately, over 6,300 patients were screened, meaning most of those had new biopsies sequenced by the central labs at the NCI, though towards the end of the trial, the network of labs began to open up, and I'll show you that in more detail. Of those, about 37% were found to have a molecular alteration that permitted matching to one of the open arms, but ultimately, after various clinical and molecular exclusions, about half of those ultimately got onto one of the arms. So that is an issue that was both a success, showing you could do this in such a large scale, but of course a limitation in that many patients, for various reasons, but often because they simply progressed in the time that this took, did not get in an arm. And similarly, the COG had 3 pediatric arms that functioned in parallel to this. Well, so a number of biologic challenges were learned from that large effort. Of course, that's still going on, wrapping up and being published. But this trial, together with lots of efforts in precision medicine, have certainly led to the understanding that most solid tumors do not have a single genomic driver, though some do. And although many genes have been proposed as cancer drivers, only few really so far can be targeted by single agent therapies that can actually achieve tumor regression. And of those objective responses with single agent therapies, most are not durable due to the fairly rapid emergence of resistance. In addition, it's certainly been seen that driver mutations may have differing responses to targeted therapies based on the particular tumor type they're in. It's not purely similar across all tumors agnostically. And those responses also may be limited due to emerging genomic alterations leading to resistance differently in different cancer types. One obvious follow-up to a single agent matching protocol is, of course, a combination one, from our experience in combination therapies in general. There are challenges to doing that in this genomically matched system as well. Obviously, potential combinations of all agents are, potentially unlimited, and so there needs to be some strategy in selecting what the most promising combinations really will be, particularly in a tumor-agnostic setting. The contribution of individual drugs to the activity of a combination may not be clearly known, and so unlike the match with multiple single arms, this may often require randomization in arms. Since most drug combinations require safety testing prior to the efficacy component, certainly criteria needed to be set to understand what that safety needed to be to open an arm and mechanisms for doing that. And obviously mechanisms for developing agreements between NCI and multiple different pharmaceutical companies in combinations needed to be done and were challenging. And then, of course, as I'll show you, the genomic testing is now being done locally for screening, and so there need to be mechanisms to make sure this could be handled efficiently. Well, so based on all of that, the hypotheses that were developed for combo match are the following: that we could use a genomically driven, evidence-based addition of a targeted agent to another anti-cancer therapy. That could be a targeted agent itself or other standard cytotoxic or hormonal agents, and that combination will produce a clinical benefit greater than the treatment with either individual agent. That the extent of that clinical benefit will be defined by a statistical plan developed for each of the protocol cohorts, but overall, the goal of combo match is that at least 30% of all of these cohorts will meet their positive primary endpoint as that was defined. And then the real central hypothesis is that a precision medicine initiative could be organized around the principles of reliance on preclinical in vivo evidence that will officially generate clinical trials that are likely to reach these clinical endpoints. And I'll show you the manner in which that was done. So the combo match has then been the development of the combo match has been across the NCTN, a collaboration of all of the NCTN groups, including SWOG, and as you'll see, is now a blend of seeking single agent trials as well as randomized trials, and a first wave will be hopefully opening in the next several months, and a number of additional arms will continue to be added going forward, developed by all of the groups. So here are the requirements that the Agents and Genes Working Committee used over the past several years to select trials for further development and advancing through the first wave of studies. And that was that there was in vivo evidence of synergy for anti-tumor activity with a drug combination in at least 2 genomically relevant preclinical models, such as mouse PDX models, cell line derived xenografts that had been genomically characterized, et cetera. That in vivo anti-tumor activity of a combination must be analogous to clinical benefit in humans, meaning not just a significant slowing of growth, but really showing response and hopefully showing evidence of synergy in that preclinical model. Of course, that there was clinical evidence, meaning in humans, of tolerability of this combination. Sometimes that was already in hand. Otherwise, various phase 1 efforts have been done and are required going forward. That potentially eligible patients will be identified by standard of care genomic sequencing at qualified network labs, and I'll show you this in a minute. So this is not now done centrally by the NCI, nor paid for by the NCI, but is simply done as standard of care at all of our institutions before eligibility can even be determined. So hopefully is much more accessible and practical. Each study you'll see often has several cohorts. In general, we're hoping at least one of those is tumor agnostic, but others may be tumor specific. And the statistics for all this have been done by the groups involved in the development of each. So as I say, just to go over this again, the molecular eligibility now is different than the initial match trial was. Standard of care testing will be done at any of the network labs, and this is over 40 labs. I'll show you the list in a minute. All of the common commercial labs and many academic labs are approved for this. And so that can be done by a physician and their patient before even looking at the registration protocol. And then, as you'll see, the same type of eligibility process will go on. In addition, a biopsy will occur after the initial combination treatment trial enrollment for research purposes and to retrospectively confirm that standard of care molecular testing. So you can just see here, there's a large list now of NCI match designated laboratories, including all the commercial labs and many academic labs, and this list is already out of date. So there's a wide area that can be utilized. Those labs then will submit reports centrally to the NCI, as I'll show you in a minute, for determination of eligibility. So here's the overall schema. So as I say, on the left then is standard of care testing through any of those labs of next-gen sequencing studies. And then based on those findings, the physician and their patient can choose to explore combo match as a trial. At that point, then clinical information, tumor types, previous treatments, et cetera, will be collected and sent essentially to the Matchbox or to the PMAC through the open network for analysis. So that's the registration trial aspect, which, by the way, is now approved and open. So then you can move to the treatment trial aspect, in which the PMAC assigns a particular patient to a treatment trial. Now, if a patient might have multiple potential trials, which will clearly happen when you see some of the genomic target lists, that decision will be made by an algorithm that includes distribution of the trials, patients' tumor types, but also, importantly, includes the preference and choice of the patient and their treating physician. So they certainly get to weigh in which arm they would prefer to be on if there are several arms open. Then, similar to the match, the patient, of course, goes on to the trial. At that point, there's a research biopsy or collection of a recent biopsy tissue, and upon progression, another biopsy with circulating DNA collected on the way. Of note, again, if a patient has several potential arms, after progression on the first, they can wrap around and re-enter on a second arm without going through all the initial process. So again, hopefully advancing the efficiency. Okay, so at this point, we have 8, the master registration protocol is approved through the CIRB and CTEP. There's 8 trials planned for activation in the first wave, hopefully over the next month or 2. And you can see it's from all of the NCTN groups. COG has some protocols in the works that will be in the second wave. The Agents and Genes Working Committee that many of you have served on and contribute to will be reopening for consideration now of future treatment arms going forward, and that's going to happen next month as well. So I encourage all of you with ideas about combinations to begin thinking about progressing with those. And here's, of course, the overall structure. So again, there's a master registration protocol. This is being administered through the ECOG academic offices. And then hopefully this will be simplified in terms of opening and activating by combining all of the current treatment sub-protocols or treatment arms, here listed as potentially 5, as a single cassette that can be opened. And then additional protocols as they develop in the future can be added to this on a pre-activation process. So hopefully this will let sites open only 2 or potentially with the pediatric COG arms 3 protocols and simplify the process. And finally, so here are the initial 8 sub-protocols that are opening. And as I say, these have all been approved and we hope are moving ahead shortly. So I'm not going to go through all the details of them, but you can see there's arms such as olaparib plus alpelisib, the PIK3CA, in DNA damage response gene mutated breast cancer, palbo and binimetinib in a variety of RAS-RAF mutant tumors, binimetinib and FOLFOX in RAS-RAF mutant cholangiocarcinomas that don't have V600E, and a number of other arms I'll let you see there, KRAS G12C targeted agents plus panitumumab, olaparib plus selumetinib in NF1 mutated breast and GYN cancers, et cetera. This is the first wave. There's about an equal number of sub-protocols being developed for a second wave, hopefully in the spring. And then, as I say, we'll be considering new protocols going forward to continue in this idea of being flexible and continue rolling with new drugs, new targets as they're developed. And so with that, I'll thank you and thank the many, many members of all the NCTN groups, including many here at SWOG, who have served on these committees for a number of years now, developing this program, and we're very excited that these will be opening soon and starting to get results. Thanks.
Jim, I'm going to violate my own rule and ask you one quick question.
Yeah.
Pediatric match kind of mysteriously appeared after the original ECOG match. No plans for pediatric combo match? They're just
No, actually there are, and I just didn't have that in the, I don't know if this is on, but in the initial wave, COG is part of this whole group. There is a pediatric protocol with a MEK inhibitor in pediatric patients that will be opening probably in the next several months.
Sorry, that's what I meant. They're not going to have their own standalone separate.
No. So this now will be part of that whole cassette. It'll have to be slightly dependent at the site in terms of pediatric opening both. They're together, but they could certainly do it all together.
Fantastic. Thank you. So for our final talk, Dr. Seoin-Hu Luskaven is Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of Solid Tumor Immunotherapy at the Huntsman Cancer Institute at the University of Utah. She is the chair of SWOG's Immunotherapeutics Committee and is co-principal investigator of the S2101 bicazo pilot study for the Immunomatch trial. Today, she's going to present, hopefully successfully and definitely virtually, on that pilot and outline the larger Immunomatch study. So guys, take it away if you can.
Thank you, Dr. Blanke, for providing this opportunity for IMATCH update. I'm speaking on behalf of the entire NCI and SWOG IMATCH study team. Next slide, please. Do you have my slide there? Next slide. So the IMATCH effort involves everyone listed on this slide and beyond. It's really an honor of my lifetime to be able to work with this outstanding team in the past 3 years. So it started, the IMATCH effort started as a IMATCH workshop organized by NCI in April of 2019. Many IO experts from across the NCTN network joined the workshop and provided their thoughts and ideas and recommendations. So it took another year to put the concept together that is preliminarily approved by NCI leadership, but they recommend to run a IMATCH pilot trial to test the concept and just the feasibility of having this IMATCH structure. So it took another year. Can you click the slide again, which shows the timeline? Thank you. Yeah, it took us another year to develop the protocol, everything accelerated in the past year after the protocol was submitted to CTAP. And I'm glad to announce that the protocol is finally activated on October 14th, which is last week, and we had the kickoff session at the IO committee meeting a couple of days ago. So next slide, please. So what is the IMATCH concept? So in the past several years, we have seen the success of checkpoint inhibitor-based immunotherapy across different tumor types. It's mainly the assignment is because of the prolonged patient survival. But we have also seen the failure of combination immunotherapy in the phase 3 setting. It's not necessarily the failure of the treatment, but the failure of the trial itself, to have a randomized trial without patient selection. Because we all know on the left side of this slide, you can see the mechanism of resistance to immunotherapy is heterogeneous. And if there is no patient selection, it's very hard to fish out particular efficacy signal in this heterogeneous population. And can you click the slide? On the right side, you can see the ideal situation in the future. We like to have biomarkers for each combination immunotherapy, and that's truly a IMATCH, but we don't have those biomarkers yet. It takes time to develop, and sometimes we just can't. So in IMATCH, in the middle, please click this slide again. In IMATCH, we want to, do an intermediate step. We want to use biomarkers that we already know to separate the patient into different biological groups, to separate the patient into different mechanism of resistance so that we can test combination therapy and find the best subgroup of patients for the combination to further develop. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand that the biomarker we use in IMATCH is not for patient selection. It is to reflect the tumor microenvironment and the resistant mechanisms, the biology that's behind the resistant mechanisms in that particular patient. So in IMATCH, I think in the current IMATCH, we want to use tumor mutational burden, which is a marker of tumor antigen genicity. It shows how different the tumor is compared to the normal cells. And another biomarker we want to use is a tumor inflammation score. So it reflects whether there are immune cells in the tumor microenvironment and whether they're active or not. By using the combination of these two biomarkers, on the right side, we want to separate the tumor into these 4 different groups with, we hypothesize there's distinct resistant mechanisms in these different groups and to help the combination immunotherapy to find the subgroup to further develop. Next slide, please. So in the IMATCH initiative, so there is a central screening protocol. The patients who get enrolled into IMATCH will all go through this central screening protocol. And they will have tumors analyzed for integral biomarkers that we just discussed, and they will be assigned to a particular molecular group. And there will be sub-protocols underneath this central screening protocol, and the patient will be assigned to the appropriate sub-protocol. There will be sample collection for more detailed or deeper retrospective studies to look for more precise biomarker for the combination immunotherapy. Next slide, please. So because this is a new concept and there's no existing structure to support this trial, so NCI recommended to run a IMATCH pilot to explore the IMATCH concept in the prospective manner and to test the feasibility of prospective biomarker stratification and streamline this central protocol operational structure. So there comes the S2101 trial. We call it Picasso trial. That's the IMATCH pilot. Next slide, please. So this trial is a phase 2 trial. It take patients who have melanoma or head and neck squamous cell carcinoma who have already progressed on anti-PD-1 therapy. And every patient will get a combination of cabozantinib and nivolumab. And all patients will be stratified by tumor biomarkers. Next slide, please. So we hypothesized that cabozantinib, which is the anti-VEGF based TKI, can reverse the immune suppressive microenvironment and synergize with anti-PD-1 therapy. The reason we take patients who have head and neck squamous cell carcinoma and melanoma is because previous published data showed the biological groups that we are studying might be evenly distributed in these tumor types. So every patient will get prospective stratification based on the biomarker. Next slide, please. So this is a schema of the trial, of this pilot trial. Patient with those two histology will enter the trial and get the biopsy or recent archival tissue can also be submitted. And there are 2 stages in this trial. In stage 1, patients don't need to wait for the biomarker results before they get treated. And at the end of stage 1, there will be a temporary hold. And the feasibility will be analyzed. And only if the feasibility, we pass the feasibility criteria pre-designed for the trial, then we can enter the stage 2. There is a feasibility checkpoint in stage 2 as well. So equal numbers of patients with melanoma or head and neck squamous cell carcinoma will be enrolled into each of those biological groups. Next slide, please. So this is just an overview of the trial and the procedures that need to be conducted during the trial. It's a little busy and I will not get into the detail, but it captures all the steps that need to be conducted in the trial. Next slide, please. So the major objective of this pilot study is feasibility. We want to make sure this hypothesis and this prospective testing of biomarkers can be reasonably conducted. And also we want to look for efficacy signal across different biological groups. Next slide, please. And for secondary objectives and additional objectives, we want to collect additional safety data, feasibility data, efficacy data, and also collect samples for subsequent retrospective studies. Next slide, please. So the biomarkers we will use in the pilot is a tumor mutational burden and tumor immune inflammation score, which use the nanostring TIS score. Currently, we will use a cutoff of 10 TMB and the TIS score of 6 to separate patient into this 4 different biological groups. Next slide, please. The eligibility criteria is pretty standard in this trial, and the main criteria is a patient with melanoma and head and neck squamous cell carcinoma who have already progressed on anti-PD-1. And there are some criteria specific for for cabozantinib, for safety of using cabozantinib in this tumor in these tumor types. Next slide, please. And next slide. So these are the treatments of cabozantinib and nivolumab schedule during the trial. It's pretty standard, and that there are safety checkup and efficacy evaluation throughout the trial. Next slide is the table, the study calendar, it's a pretty standard phase 2 study calendar. The only thing unique for this trial is the biopsy of the tumor before starting the treatment, and that will be covered by NCI. Next slide, please. So you can imagine for a feasibility trial, it's rather complicated to design the statistical considerations. So there are several important feasibility steps that we have. So there is monitoring throughout the trial. Every 20 patients enrolled will have a feasibility checking. And there is interim analysis after stage 1, that's between 45 to 60 patients entering the trial. We'll look at the sample turnaround time. We will look at the futility of the treatment, and there are criteria to stop the trial if it doesn't meet the criteria. And there is also analysis of the TI's cutoff, and the cutoff points might be adjusted for stage 2. Next slide, please. So this is the contact information for conducting this trial. And next slide, please. So I want to thank everybody on the IMATCH study team, both from the NCI side and from SWOG side, for their dedication, for spending their efforts and their time on this trial in the past 3 years. I want to thank the past melanoma committee chairs, Dr. Rebus and Dr. Grossman, as well as Dr. Blanke, for trusting me in this position. I want to thank Dr. Katie Politi, who is my co-chair of the immunotherapy committee, and she is the PI of the central protocol screening central screening protocol, and also all the people I highlight here at the bottom on the right side. These are the main people who have helped to move the protocol forward. So next slide, please. So this is a new way we are exploring. We don't know whether it's the right way, but I hope you will be interested in joining the effort to help find the best way to bring precision immunotherapy treatment to our patients. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Sue. And in fact, I want to thank all of our speakers / leaders for educating us and for giving us a glimpse into the future. There is no doubt that these and future match trials and all their progeny will certainly become an increasingly large part of the NCI's clinical research practice portfolio and research portfolio in the coming years. So we're to close, but speaking of the fame and fortune we're going to earn with these match studies, kind of reminds me of an amusing story that occurred just a couple days ago right here at the Hyatt. After I checked in, I wanted dinner at the main hotel restaurant. So I went to drop off my code and told the nice person behind the counter, "I'm Dr. Charles D. Blanke." Well, the checker replied, "Oh, sir, there's no need to give me your name." So I have to admit, I kind of puffed up a bit, right? We've been coming here for years, but I was pretty flattered. I mean, how many famous oncologists are there out there? So at the end of a great meal, happy as a clam, I went to get my coat. Clerk produced it immediately. My ticket stub was in the pocket. And of course, instead of my name on the back, the clerk had written "bald guy with all the wrinkles." Anyway, this brings an end to our general plenary. I want to close by thanking you, our members, our researchers, for attending, for your extraordinary efforts day in and day out to advance cancer care for our patients. Please enjoy the rest of the group meeting. I hope you have a chance to enjoy Chicago. Take care.
Thank you very much, Chuck.